Welcome to No One Tells You This. I'm Laura Massetti. Nobody tells you that before you start your career, that at some point, skills are not the ceiling. Getting things done with people who see the world differently than you is. My guest today has spent 25 years doing exactly that in some of the most complex environments in the world. Michael Shipler is the Vice President of Common Ground Leadership at Search for Common Ground, nominated for the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize. That's a really big deal. And the architect of Common Ground Leadership. Michael, welcome. I am so excited to have you here. It's so good to see you again.
Thanks, Laura. It's fantastic to be here on this podcast.
This is going to be fun because you offer a completely new perspective and a genre of work that is completely new to me. So I'm excited to hear more about it. So I briefly introduced you. Please do yourself justice. I want to hear about you, what you've been working on, your journey, all of that good stuff.
Fantastic. So I have spent my career working in highly divided environments all over the world where divisions are leading to conflict, leading to violence, sometimes cataclysmic violence. That has included here in the United States, where I'm from and where I live, which is a society that's also divided. And I've spent the vast majority of my career with this international organization called Search for Common Ground. We call ourselves Search for short and Searchers. Search has a presence in 28 countries all over the world, places like Afghanistan and Sudan, South Sudan, Israel and Palestine. We have a big program in the United States as well. And what we do is we bring people together across really stark divides to find ways to work together, collaborate, do real things together that address those root causes of conflict and violence. And I've been able to do this in all kinds of environments. I spent many years living in Nepal during and after the armed conflict there as part of working on the peace process that brought that conflict to an end, working communities. I spent a lot of my career working with young people and looking at how young people could play a really critical contribution to transforming their own societies. I worked on a wide range of issues, from working with security forces and militaries to working with young people in armed groups and gangs to mining companies to universities, all different kinds of actors, all of whom have a big role to play in making our world a more peaceful place.
It's incredible. Definitely a journey that I don't think when you go to university, you say to yourself, that's the job that I'm going to be doing in 20 years from now. So tell me a little bit more on your path and how you ended up on this trajectory.
Yeah, when I was a teenager, I grew up in Washington, D.C. area, and I got an internship my senior year of high school at a law firm that was working with refugees, mostly from Central America, doing pro bono services. And the job that I had was doing intakes. So people would come and they would basically share what they were going through. They were applying for asylum. And then the law firm would decide whether to take them or not. And so I would write down their stories. And the question I had to ask always was, have you or your family ever faced a threat from an armed group or a state military? And one day, a 17-year-old girl who was exactly my age came in. She sat down across the table from me, and she was from El Salvador. And she told her story. Basically, military came to her home, pulled her brother out and shot him in the front. She ran out the back door and fled and walked basically till she arrived in Washington, D.C. There I was 17, and I'm sitting there thinking, this is my counterpart. And I'm like, do I want to go to Haverford College or Brown, or where do I want to apply? And she was my counterpart. There we were in the same physical space, but with such totally different life trajectories. And it started me on a path of really asking this question, well, what are other young people going through? How are they responding to conflict? What's going on? And I started really asking that question. And so when I graduated from college, I was just really interested in this. And I started looking for ways that I could connect with other young people around the world who were trying to do really positive and constructive things. And I found myself in Cambodia, and I met an amazing group of youth. They were all my age, straight out of college, university, and all of them had survived the genocide in Cambodia, the war afterwards. Their whole life had been shaped by conflict, and they had come together and formed an organization called Youth for Peace. And they essentially were saying, our parents' generation destroyed this country. It's got to be our generation that rebuilds it. And I met with the leader of it, a guy by the name of Utrain. And, he had literally started this group by bringing a group of young people together under a tree at a pagoda with this question, like, what can our generation of young people do? And he asked me to join them. He said, look, you want to help us, help us. And these folks at this point had $1,000 of funding from a couple of international organizations. And with $1,000, they had done a peace education program for 300 youth. Laura, they literally took masking tape off the wall, from when they would use flip charts for workshops, folded the masking tape to use the next day, to reutilize it until it just simply wouldn't stick. And so I spent time with this group of youth leaders working in this space, and they were bringing in kids who had been involved in gangs and youth who were activists from different places, training them in leadership development. And I really realized, wow, look at how without a lot of resources, this group of people could cross divides and really generate real influence and real power to improve their communities. And it set me on a trajectory of doing this work. I then ended up at Search for Common Ground. I worked around this question of youth, and we call it now youth, peace, and security. That's a kind of our technical language, but around like, what do young people have to contribute? How do we unleash the power of young people? Because we know no major leap in social change, in promotion of human rights, has ever occurred anywhere without the involvement of young people. That's true in the United States as well. And so that was really like my trigger, starting with people in my own generation and my own counterparts. And then it turned into a career and a life.
My goodness. Well, so amazing. And it's incredible that you got that experience so early on, because I don't know if, and I'm not super old, right? But I do feel like when you're young, coming out of university, whatever it is, you still have that fire in your belly that you can really change the world. And I feel like if you don't maximize it then you're almost a little over the hill with like, I don't know the best way to say it. It's like you're a little jaded, right? You're like, I can't change this. I can't change this. But when you're young, you still have it. It's like you just kept that upward momentum of like, yes, this is possible and I'm going after it.
Really early was that I could align my purpose and my reason for being here and the things that give me purpose in my life with the work that I do. Work didn't have to be something over here. It could be actually what I'm doing to live out my reason. And I was able to see that early and then build my entire career around that. And so everything I do is actually centered around the kind of changes that I want to contribute to. It's not necessarily centered on what I want to do, but it's centered on like, what change do I want to cause in the world? And so in that period, I didn't have the words for it as a 23-year-old, but I learned over the course of time to center my integrity on my objective. And the words that I came to learn was that at that period, I was focused on transforming the role of youth in conflict environments so that they were contributing to peace and really unleashing that power. And that was really drove me to everything I was trying to do. And then as I've grown, I've changed and shifted, like, what's my objective now? What do I want to cause now? And I've aligned the opportunities that I've pursued to those things. And I've been able to attract the kind of resources, the kind of partnerships, the kind of connections with people around what I want to contribute and the change I want to see in the world.
That's so, so amazing. And, what's really aligned with the Gen Z population right now is they are the generation that's completely focused on finding careers and missions that are aligned to your values. I feel like this is a pretty recent phenomenon where that might have been a side hobby or something that's a nice to have in your career, where now truly it's a focus of, do my values, what matters to the world align with what career that I choose?
And there's significant percentage, I don't remember the data point off the top of my head, but there is a very significant percentage of people in the workforce who expect the companies that they work for to align to their values. Something like 70%, it's in that range. That is not easy because companies have raison d'etre, which are about making money, producing a product, whatever it might be. And so this is a real clear and perpetual challenge now for people in leadership roles. Is how do they actually align and create institutions that are deeply value-laden, even if the values aren't inherently the purpose of that institution?
It's interesting where you'll work at a big company, a medium-sized company, and they'll say, okay, well, we're going to go on a heart walk this week, right? Like that will be what we're doing, but it's almost like half-baked, or it's not truly embedded in their DNA as a company and a culture. They're almost doing it just to check a box on things. Do you see that happening out there of like, trying to do that, but not fully invested into the mission of helping?
So there is a strong and I think quite a serious move among a lot of companies to understand their impact in the world beyond what their sales team, their profit margins, their revenue, beyond those immediate clear financial returns that they generate. a lot of companies are trying to understand what impact they have in the world. That has been very much largely driven by sustainability or looking at climate change, climate, carbon footprint. But now I think that is expanding. People are looking at all the other kinds of impacts they might have. The way that their product impacts how people experience other things beyond their product, etc. And so I think actually this is they talk about this as the triple bottom line, right? There's a lot to be learned from people who've been working in social impact, who have built this into the kind of work that they're doing if they're in a nonprofit and they're trying to cause change on a water resource access or poverty alleviation or employability or whatever it might be. They always study, when they do good practice, we're always studying the secondary and tertiary effects of the work that we're doing. And how does it affect conflict? How does it affect other things? And so while there is definitely a ton of lip service to this kind of thing that happens out there, and there is like dogmatic work and sort of, branding orientation, there's also really a lot of commitment to this. But what I also have found is that the more I engage with a lot of people, folks aren't necessarily equipped. They don't necessarily have the tools to understand, particularly in the arena that I'm working around polarization and conflict. They don't always necessarily know how to actually understand their impact on conflict or know how to understand even the divisions happening in their own staff and their own teams, much less, in the broader environment that they're in. And so I think this is an area that there's actually a lot of turmoil around all over the world.
Let's go a little further into that. So, can you give me an example of some of the conflict projects that you worked on in the past and the impact that Common Ground has had?
Absolutely. Everything that Search for Common Ground does focuses on bringing people or groups or institutions from across divides to work collaboratively in really practical, significant ways around their shared interests, on real things, very often around real root causes of conflict. So our starting point is our teams are made up of people who they themselves are coming across those very divides, Israelis and Palestinians in the Middle East, from across Republican, Democrat, multiracial team in the United States, teams of Hutus and Tutsis in Burundi, etc. And those teams create processes that bring all different kinds of stakeholders together to really look at how do they tackle problems that they share. And that creates really tangible results. So I'll give an example, one that folks might understand well, because it is really at the intersection of business and activism. So Lamu County is in the east of Kenya on the coast. It borders Somalia. And for quite a lot of time, there were challenges because of the armed conflict happening in Somalia across the border, where armed actors were crossing the border, recruiting young people, and they were doing it usually by boat and at night. And so the security forces took a pretty fair choice, and they essentially decided to ban all boat traffic at night. That seems like a reasonable enough security policy, except that it had a really serious consequence because most of the fishing being done in this community, which was the heart of Lamu County's economy, was done at night. Night fishing was when people went out. That's how they caught fish. And so suddenly there was a conflict between, young entrepreneurs, young fishermen who are laborers, a whole group of folks in the core part of the economy with the government. And so what we did was to create space for youth activists, for fishermen, for people from markets, all the different stakeholders involved in the seafood industry to build connection and relationships with the police, with the army, and with I think it's a county commissioner, if I'm not mistaken, who leads the head of the government in Lamu County. That head of government convened everybody with our support, and we went through a process where they actually identified, well, what's really happening here, built some trust, and made some choices to create some really practical solutions to that problem. And it was things like licensing, particular regulations around lighting on boats, some really very practical, tangible things that resulted in two things. One is that it enabled the government to continue with its security policies to address the security threats that they were facing. And it enabled the fishing community and the entire fishing industry to continue fishing at night. And what was great is not only did it enable them to do it, it increased their safety. And so that's an example where by working together, they created a higher order solution to a problem that then generated economic activity, generated business for everybody across the whole seafood supply chain, and increased the safety. And so they were able to find a real key win-win. This is the kind of approach that we use. We've been able to work with civil society groups, women's organizations to negotiate with armed actors to open up humanitarian corridors in Sudan. In the United States, we've brought whole groups of coalitions of folks from across political divides to look at identifying potential risks of political violence and responding to that, any incidents of political violence to prevent it from metastasizing, depoliticizing it, actually, by having Republicans and Democrats, religious leaders, security forces, all different kinds of folks looking at that question in a shared way and really drawing on their shared interest for preventing political violence. And this is the core essence of the approach that we take.
So freaking cool. So cool. It's like you address all of the topics that you're not supposed to talk about at dinner, right? Like politics and religion, you're like, bring it on. Like we got this. But my goodness, you're just like, so what you guys are doing is really like negotiating, mediating when emotions are at their absolute highest, right? Where your feelings, your commitment to your point of view, to your people, to your religion is just almost seems unreasonable, right? Unable to communicate with people that are so vested in it. And you guys come in and really just help to find common ground.
So part of the strategy of this is that we seek to root in the spaces and the communities where tensions are very high and build out relationships of folks across all those different divides and bring them into contact, not just into contact with each other, but into coalition together. And we're part of that coalition. We're also part of the societies where we work. And so, when we actually do that, we bring people from all different kinds of viewpoints. And we say, okay, whatever the issue might be, who has a stake in this? Who does it affect and who can influence it? And we engage them, even if they're in direct opposition to us or others in the group. And we form those coalitions. We call those multi-partial coalitions. So we're not neutral. We're not impartial. We're part of the dynamic, and so is everybody else. And so in order to solve a critical problem, we have to have multiple parts to that problem all involved. And we call it multi-partiality. And so what we do is we form multi-partial groups, and those multi-partial groups work together to tackle the problem. And those multi-partiality has superpowers. It does a whole set of things that nobody can do by themselves. It unlocks breakthroughs to problems that sometimes seem really deeply intractable. And it does it in a number of ways. One is, and you can imagine this, right? People apply this inside a company, right? When you have a multi-partial group, you have all the different perspectives necessary to really understand the problem. Not just understand the problem, you probably have lots of different creative ideas for how to solve that problem. If you're just taking one perspective and one idea how to solve that problem, you're limiting yourself deeply. This is something that's been understood by great leaders, right? Bring your marketing team and your finance team and your ops team and your manufacturing team and your supply chain team. Everybody's gonna have a different perspective on the problem. It's almost that exact same core principle, but we do it with people who don't trust each other, who have perceived each other as enemies. And what we found is that when they actually engage in that and you create space for that kind of conversation with a practical solution at heart, that actually generates more new, creative, higher order solutions to the problems. And then when you have that multi-partial coalition, it's very practical because everybody there has their skin in the game, right? They have a stake in the outcome it's going to affect them. And so people who are involved in a coalition like that, they're going to be like, I want to understand how we solve this. I'm not just here to talk. Like, talk is fine. Talk is useful. We need to talk in order to get there. But I'm not here for that. I want to create a solution and one that really helps. So it creates a solution orientation that's really practical and drives forward those solutions. And then the third thing it does is it creates enduring solutions because people who are spoilers and who might try to block you, well, they're in the room trying to help you solve the problem. It creates resources because the people who have the resources to solve the problem, well, they're in the room and they're going to be able to lean those resources in. And so in the long run, your solution is much more likely to survive. That is really the approach. We don't always do this when emotions are at their highest. That's not always the best time. Sometimes when it's a context like that, you need to work with people in separate communities. They need to get themselves ready and prepared to engage in a process like this. And sometimes it's very risky for folks in that kind of environment. So you have to focus a lot on safety. But so that's the methodology.
That's amazing. And I think about it from my own lens, because not everyone's going to get the opportunity to work in your field of work, but they may get the opportunity to work with teams that are highly complex and there might be some underlying tension and needs. And I have found that the higher you often get within an organization, you have a lot more stake on the line and what you care about. So for example, you are a C-level and you're at your top meeting, right, with the rest of your peers, and you have a lot of people underneath you, and they come to you and say, we need to cut X amount of dollars, X amount of people, whatever it is from the organization. And you, if you like your people, you like what you're doing, you believe in your mission, you fight tirelessly for your people and what you're after. And everyone else is doing the same thing. So I think it's like what you're solving for is, yes, you can pertain it to country and people conflict, right? Things like that. But then tell me a little bit more like conflict that happens on teams and practices that can be used there.
Absolutely. There are two things that I think are really important here. Conflict is normal. We always say that conflict is neither good nor bad. It is a thing. It exists. It's part of the human experience. What matters isn't whether there's conflict or not. What matters is how people respond to and engage in conflict. And conflict actually can be enormously productive. It can create all those things that I was talking about. Creates really powerful solutions. It creates advances in thinking. It creates creativity. And so the question is, how do you actually embrace the kinds of tensions and conflicts that might exist in a team? And what happens in any given team, it's never isolated just to the personalities. Yes, there's interpersonal conflict. That is part of life too. But it's almost always related to the broader society that we're in. And we're in a broader society that is deeply polarized. And so as much as people will say, we keep politics at the door, we keep identity at the door, we keep perspectives at the door, that doesn't actually manifest. I found the statistic. It was in a Harvard Business Review piece about conflict intelligent leadership by Peter Coleman. And he said 65% of employees want their companies to align to their values. That means that people are bringing their worldview and their perspectives into the room. Sometimes that might manifest as dissonance in a company. It manifests in all different kinds of ways and all kinds of tensions. And so I think that there's something really interesting and important here about actually understanding that what's happening inside your team is part of a broader dynamic in the world. It might be a broader dynamic in your company around the company's role and values, but it's also part of a broader, bigger dynamic that's going on where we're fracturing and there's increased polarization and increased distrust in institutions. All these things that are happening, people bring with them. And so leaders are finding themselves in really very difficult positions because they've been trained to do good management, to mobilize their staff, to create clarity in decision making, all the kinds of traditional leadership tools that all of us have been trained in who are in executive positions. They're not all the tools, and they're not the tools that we need to solve for the kinds of division that we're facing around, politics and race and ethnicity and class, all those things that are suddenly landing in our own teams. And then that affects how a company relates to the external environment. It undermines their ability to do risk management around their civic risks and their reputational risks. And it has this whole cascading effect.
It's so interesting because or at least when I look to solve problems, it's usually in the context that I'm aware of, right? Like I take inventory of the whole situation that I know about, all the perspectives of the people, but rarely do I think about it on the context of everything else, right? And I think that what you're saying is that as a good leader, right, and it's hard because we always don't have all this information available to us, but we have to take inventory on everything happening from the outside that's impacting your team dynamics.
Absolutely. I think that it's about all the different kind of forces that are acting on people's behaviors. You described a leader who will fight for her team, no matter what, in that budget battle. So there's a leader who has, I would say her team is her constituency. And that constituency has a set of viewpoints and perspectives and attitudes that shape, and it might be about the actual business process, might be about something else, but that shapes the way in which that leader is representing those perspectives. And so there's the relationship between the leader and her team, the relationship between the team and among itself, the teams and other teams. Suddenly you have this whole complex environment where people are having to navigate all these different forces acting on them. And sometimes it is about, what is it I need to get my job done? And so you have an HR team who might be arguing, we need to be investing deeply in how do we manage diversity, equity, inclusion. You may have a legal team who's saying, there's a lot of risk around even using words or language like that right now because of the political environment that we're in. You might have another team that's saying, that's all fine, but our supply chain is at risk because of X, Y, and Z that's going on in the geopolitical world. Well, those are all totally different forces acting on the decision-making process that anybody is manifesting. And so I think that what I've learned doing this work is that micro and the macro have a relationship to each other, and so even when we're working with a group of youth leaders in Lamu County who are building relationship and connection to the government of Lamu County to figure out how to open up fishing grounds in the night, they are navigating all these other dynamics and these forces, but they can only really navigate that when they do it together. They actually find ways of working collaboratively, bring in all the perspectives that are necessary, build some trust with each other, and find small, clear, actionable things they can do that are incremental that actually create real results and real benefits. And I think that's as much true in a team as it is external.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I want to hit on one point that you said that seems to be fundamental in every conversation that I have on this podcast, and even in the course that I teach as well, is that a piece around trust. So let's talk about that a little bit more from trust from your perspective and how to give that, how to gain that. What does that look like in practice?
So there are a few things that we've learned about trust. Firstly, trust is a central ingredient to accomplishing any endeavor. Trust among stakeholders is critical. And we've learned that trust doesn't come from dialogue alone. Dialogue is necessary. It's important, but it's insufficient. Through dialogue, people are able to open up relationships, create space for people to speak to one another, understand each other's real interests, come to agreement on things. It's all great. And it's really fundamental and necessary, but it's insufficient. Trust is actually built through people doing real things together and accomplishing real results. It's really a practical thing is where trust comes from, especially when there's been division and distrust is at the starting point. And so people need to do things, have results, see those results, understand it, see the benefits to themselves and to others, then do more things. See those results, do more things, and get incrementally more and more in a position where they can tackle the most critical problems that they might face. For example, we do a lot of work around the relationship between police or security forces and communities, especially young people. I can't tell you how many times we've started by organizing soccer, football tournaments where young people and police play together. And then they're like, all right, okay, that was fun. Let's see what we can do next. And then being able to leverage that, turn that kind of opening and those little accomplishments of doing stuff into something more and more serious, more and more fundamental, and more enduring. And one of the things that we say very often, our CEO, Shamal Idris, always says, progress moves at the speed of trust. And I like to kind of convert that into say endeavors move at the speed of trust, whether you're trying to manage a supply chain or mobilize the staff to do a project or transform conflict in your country. The speed at which you can accomplish that is completely determined by the levels of trust that you create and build over time.
I love that. And I also think to add to that, it's about consistency around that. That consistency piece is, I think, one of the action-oriented ways to do that.
One-off kind of experience that people have with each other can build relationships. It builds emotional connections. It can build some sense of solidarity, even across the starkest dividing lines, but it doesn't necessarily build interdependence. Interdependence comes from that consistency that you're talking about, Laura. It means when people actually tie up their own outcomes in the outcomes of others. And that's a really powerful thing. And it's fundamental and necessary in the world today. And it's really underinvested in. I was reading I think it was the IMF, the World Bank put out a study recently that showed that 18% of supply chain disruptions in the world come from some form of social conflict. And those are things, labor strike, all different types of social conflict. It's not all the huge geopolitical war in Iran and that kind of thing. It comes from a lot of more micro social conflicts. Those are things that can be resolved and preempted, in fact, through collaborative, consistent trust building and the building of interdependencies that happen through collaboration.
So, what this reminds me of is, that kind of building trust from two sides of it, right? So there's the managers building trust, and then there is the employees building trust. And I think of a practical way is a manager building trust of that manager that you see once a quarter, right? That kind of just does a flyby and says, okay, well, I took the team out for dinner, right? So I built that trust. They should be able to be productive. And you're like, no, that doesn't do it. That doesn't do it. So as a manager, for example, how do you build that sort of trust with your team in a way where they trust in your mission, they trust in providing you the value that you need in the organization as well?
So these same core principles apply to forming and building a team out or getting a team to really perform. It's really about helping everybody to understand. Firstly, it's about assembly of that team and making sure that you have that diversity of perspectives, expertise, areas, skills, access, whatever it is you might need. To have that diversity in the group, and it might be diversity in terms of lived experience as well, and having that in the team itself so that there's a mixture of perspectives. And then applying that principle of saying, well, we actually need to understand really deeply what's underneath those perspectives. What are the real interests that people have? And then build out action based on those interdependencies and really look for solutions together. And when you build those out based on those interdependencies and tie people's performance to each other's results and their own performance measures to those results, well, that creates those interdependencies in terms of their real outcomes. And very often it's their performance reviews, their salary increases. Everything gets tied actually to their ability to work really powerfully and effectively in that team. And so those in fact, a lot of ways, the same principles and the same values apply. Putting mission at the center for a nonprofit, putting real clarity on what a strategy is, and then really working together to figure out how that strategy is also really very central.
So amazing. I am so happy that I met you, Michael, because you have like a very different needed perspective on business, conflict, resolution, like all the things that really happen in real life. It seems like you've developed a business and like a brand around that, which is so fantastic. So I'm happy that we met. So we're going to get into something a little fun, and they are rapid fire questions. So I want you to give me your gut reaction to something. And I just added one that just came in top of mind. So I'll start with that one, which I just thought of this. So forgive me if it's not good.
Let's do it.
Okay. What is your favorite conflict in Hollywood? I'll give you mine.
Give me yours. Yeah, let's hear it.
So my favorite in Hollywood is old school, but it goes back to Jennifer Aniston and Angelina Jolie over Brad Pitt, right? So that's the example of mine.
I wonder if I would say DC Comics Marvel. That's like a rivalry if I had to pick one. I mean, that's a rivalry, and and that one's a good one. It spurs a lot of good debate.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. What is the first job that you ever had?
I worked at a bread bakery. I never got promoted to baker. I sold bread, cleaned muffin tins and bread tins, mopped the floor.
Okay, cool. I love that. I worked at a bon pon. That was like one of my first jobs, so I could absolutely relate to that. Okay, one word for what great leadership looks like from the inside.
One word, aligned.
The country that has surprised you the most.
Pakistan.
Collaboration or compromise?
Collaboration.
Which one actually works? Okay, that was an easy one for you, right? That's fundamental for you. Okay, the one thing that most leaders think they have, but do not.
Courage.
Ooh, good answers. I'm impressed with all of these, especially the Marvel one. So awesome. So good. So Michael, before we close out, anything that you'd like to share with our audience that we weren't able to capture that's important?
Yeah. One of the most interesting things that's happened to our organization in the last 3 or 4 years is that leaders outside of this peace building sphere that we work in have been coming to us, people who know us, and saying to us, isn't working in the world today. I've had people reaching out, music industry to heads of major universities to executives in all kinds of different spaces and companies, and who are looking at the world today and looking at polarization and finding that they're being asked to play a role in the conflicts around them, and they're not equipped. And they really are looking for how do they transform their leadership, the leaderships of their teams. And that is really what prompted the creation of Common Ground Leadership, because we realized when people are asking us for support, we realized that if we're going to pursue our mission, which is about the way the world deals with conflict, trying to push collaborative solutions to conflicts, well, the most powerful thing that we could do is actually create ways to enroll people who carry all different kinds of influence to find ways to do this. And so we've created Common Ground Leadership with the goal of equipping leaders with the techniques I've been talking about today, with that leadership discipline, to connect people who want to use collaborative solutions, who want to reach out across divides, to connect them with each other, and to amplify the voices of leaders who are reaching across divides, recognizing that those are the courageous leaders in the world, those who actually are willing to work with people who they think of as their adversaries in collaborative ways to solve real problems that create benefits. Those are the courageous leaders. And how do we amplify those voices? And so this is what I'm doing now. I'm building out And we've created Common Ground Leadership. It's something that's accessible to people who are in leadership or aspiring to be leaders in their own realm, whether they're in a company or they're a social impact leader, whether they're private sector, public sector, to really be able to learn this leadership discipline, to be able to build this into their toolkit for how they can actually achieve results. And so that's something that's available to folks. And I would really encourage anybody who's interested in this to reach out to me.
I love that. And I think to your point, why this is valuable for every leader is because conflict will happen. And it might not be grandiose social conflict, or at least you don't think that's the main source of it, right? But conflict will happen and you need to be equipped on how you handle conflict. And I think whether you're early in your career, big CEO of a company, the way you handle that, the way you react to that makes all the difference in how you build trust, you grow, and you build your business.
I feel like in the world today, this is the competitive advantage. Technology is equalizing and AI is equalizing folks in all kinds of ways. People, have access to technical tools that they would have had to invest huge amounts of time in studying and learning and mastering. And so really the competitive advantage of the future is how people build relationships. And those who build relationships that are solution oriented and invest their resources and time and effort into that and build relationships across divides, those are going to be the most competitive and compelling leaders of the future.
You're speaking my language. The same thing with Real Work Ready. It's like that human piece that everyone just, we're brushing over because we're so much on this AI kick of things that it's like really the differentiator is us, the human element of us. And I love the way that you're making a difference in that. I'm doing my little part in my world of things, but I think more of that mindset is so needed in us in both business and personal as well.
Yeah.
Okay, Michael. So one question that I ask all of my guests, so I have to ask you. Early in your career, nobody told me blank, but once I figured it out, it changed everything for me.
So early in my career, nobody told me that the leadership skills or even the technical skills that I've developed to succeed were not going to be particularly relevant for the next challenge I was going to face. And so I've learned through hard times that what I was good at before isn't going to work. It's like the wrong toolkit in the next challenge I have. And that actually the key to success for me has been retooling and retooling and retooling all the time and recognizing that that's not just because of the change in job, but because of the change in the world. And that like what worked in, 10 years ago in terms of leadership in the world today isn't going to work. Generations change, social dynamics change. And so I'm having to constantly retool and listen and learn and then retool again my own leadership in order to succeed. Nobody told me that one.
Yeah, that's really good. I like your idea of a toolkit, right? And that it's a fluid experience, right? You're always adding to it and like taking out the stuff that's not useful anymore. But yeah, the old school approach of like, I learned it in the past, I'm good for life. That's not the way it should be.
And we all know when that happens, how that can cause a lot of friction and conflict in a team. Like, yeah, I know that worked in 2004, Michael. Like, I'm sure it was a brilliant idea in 2004. We are not in 2004, man. And it's something that I've had to learn the hard way because there have been times when I've had that conversation with people and I'm like, good point. It takes a certain level of a learning mindset. And listening to others, it ties to what we've been talking about too, because of working with folks who are really different from me also it's those relationships where people are able to say, hey, that's not working. It may have worked in another context, in another time, in another job that you held. But in this one, actually, you need to think about it in a new way. And it's actually that perspective setting stuff that has enabled me to constantly seek to evolve my leadership and recognize the limitations and the possibilities at the same time.
Amazing.
So you were going to ask me where can folks find information?
Yeah, where can they find you? Where can they get some time with you?
So you can find us on commongroundleaders.org. So www.commongroundleaders.org. You can find everything about the program that I've just described. And you can reach out to me as well on LinkedIn. I'm available there and really very happy to connect with people who would have an interest in diving into all of this.
Amazing. Amazing. And I will include all that information in the show notes as well with all of those links. Michael, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to have this extended conversation with you and look forward to the next time where we have some updates on, maybe some other conflicts that you resolved, because I know that's happening.
Thank you, Laura. This has been incredibly fun and a wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thanks. Thanks so much. All right. Cheers.